Hello students, my name is Dr. Adeigbe. I am to take you Business Law, MBA 833. Your study sessions will entail the following. We will go into contract during the study session 1. Study session 2, we will handle elements of a valid contract, and during session 3, we will be going into elements of a valid contract. Session 4 will introduce the contract itself, where you will learn terms of a contract, termination of a contract, and remedies. During section 5, we will be going into sale of goods, while section 6 will introduce agency 1, the first part of agency. The next one will be introduced during study session 7 for agency 2. Agency 2 will get completed, and we will move to study session 8, when we will learn about partnership. We will introduce you to partnership there. And during study session 9, we will be going into introduction of to negotiable instruments. Now, this is an introduction to the law of contract. This study session seeks to introduce you the Nigerian law of contract. It will provide a foundation to everything you will learn during and the duration of this module. In this session, you will learn 1. The definition of the word contract. 2. The importance of binding contracts and the classification of contracts. When you have studied this session, you should be able to do the following. 1. Define and use correctly all the words printed in bold. Explain the meaning of the word contract. Explain the importance of binding contracts, and discuss the different classifications of contracts. After this, we'll have to go into the main aspect of the course. And I'm introducing this with the subject matter of contracts. What is a contract? A contract can be defined as an agreement which is legally binding on the parties to it, and which, if broken, that is, may be enforced by an action in court against the defaulting party. Professor Sage defines a contract as an agreement which the law will enforce or recognize as affecting the legal rights and duties of parties to that contract. According to Tritel, in his book, The Law of Contract, contract is defined as a set of promises which the law will enforce. You should note that not all agreements can be considered binding contracts. For instance, there are contracts made without consideration, contractual intention, among others. This will be discussed in detail in study session 3. Why contracts are enforceable by law? Commercial and economic life, that is, everyday business in modern society, is governed by agreements. So, a system where a person is liable to back out of an agreement he has made with another without any remedy, for example, compensation for any losses suffered or costs incurred, to the latter, the innocent, who is the innocent or the wronged party, will create havoc and undermine the world of business and commerce. Consequently, Commercial and economic life, that is everyday business, in modern society is governed by agreement. And with this, I'm further talking about why contracts are enforceable by law. According to L.G. Joel, to ensure order, peace and security, and the smooth and efficient operation of commerce, industry, and the economy, the law recognizes the need for the satisfaction of reasonable and well-founded expectations created by promises and agreements. The legal relations created by law of contracts enable a person to whom money, goods, services, or some other benefits has been promised to enforce the promise or to obtain some remedy for the breach. There are two basic types of contracts. These are formal contracts and simple contracts. Other types of contracts include express and implied, and bilateral and unilateral contracts. Formal contracts are contracts that are made by deed, and they are also called contracts under seal. They must be in writing, typed on a special paper or parchment. A deed is given full legal effect, that is executed, when it is signed, sealed, and delivered by the party executing it to another party. Why are contracts enforceable, and what does enforceability mean? To prevent a breakdown of commercial and economic life, enforceability means the right of a party to a contract to enforce or bring an action in court to enforce the terms of a contract. I am still continuing classification of contracts. A formal contract derives its validity solely based on its form. This means that they are enforceable by the party in whose favor they have been executed, even in the absence of consideration, which will be discussed in study section 3 fully, or even an agreement. In other words, a promise made by Mr. A to Mr. B is enforceable by Mr. B as long as that promise is contained in a deed. Formal contracts are useful in making gratuitous promises, a promise made without consideration, enforceable. Another type of contract is simple contracts. This is a contract other than a formal contract, which is called simple contract, as I've said. A simple contract may be made either orally or in writing, as opposed to a formal contract that derives its validity solely on form. Only a person that has furnished consideration can bring an action to enforce a simple contract. In other words, a simple contract defines its validity based on the presence of consideration in it. Consideration in its simplest form simply means whatever you give in exchange to be able to enforce a contract in a court of law. You should know that certain types of simple contracts are required to be in writing to be valid. For example, contracts involving the disposition of interest in land, contracts of guarantee, among others. The difference between these types of contracts and contracts under seal is that in the latter, the presence of a seal is mandatory, while in a simple contract required to be in writing, the only important factor is that that simple contract must be in writing for it to be enforceable. What is the major difference between a formal and a simple contract? That's a question that can be posed. The answer is that a formal contract derives its validity from its form, while a simple contract can only be enforced by a person who has furnished consideration. Please note this. Express and implied contracts. In an express contract, the terms of the contract are clearly stated by the parties to the contract, and the contract is concluded on the basis of these terms. However, in an implied contract, the terms of the contract are not expressly stated, and the courts would normally construe the existence of a contract by the conduct of the parties. For instance, a student registers in a university to study law and pays the applicable fees. In an express contract, the terms of the contract are clearly stated by the parties to the contract, and the contract is concluded on the basis of these terms. However, in an implied contract, the terms of the contract are not expressly stated, and the courts would normally construe the existence of a contract by the conduct of the parties. For instance, a student registers in a university to study law and pays the applicable fees. The conduct of the student implies that he will abide by all the rules and regulations of the university. On the other hand, by registering to students and accepting the fees, the university by their contract imply that they will provide teaching facilities for the student and award a certificate to the student on the successful completion of the course. Bilateral and unilateral contracts can be demonstrated in a way to show that the bilateral contracts are a promise by one party in exchange for a promise by another party. It is a one-to-one contract. We have the person who is the first party that is offering, usually called the offeror. He is the person who makes the offer. The other party is the offeree, is the person to whom the contract was made. An example is sale of goods contract, where we have the buyer who promises to pay the price, and we have the seller who promises to deliver the goods. In unilateral contracts, we have a promise by one party in exchange for an action by another party. It is a one-to-all contract. In it too, we have the person offering, who is usually called the offeror. But because of the nature of this type of contract, which is unilateral contract, he has many offerees. For an example of demonstration of this is when X promises a reward to anyone who will find his lost wallet. X bound himself to the promise, but no one is bound to search for the lost wallet. But if Y, having seen the offer, recovers the wallet and returns it, he is entitled to the reward. A bilateral contract involves an exchange of promises between parties to a contract. The offeror offering to do something in exchange for the offeree promising to do something in return. An example of this is Mr. A, who promises to sell his 2017 Toyota Camry to Mr. B in exchange for payment of the sum of 10 million. At this stage, all we have is a mere exchange of promises and no performance from either party. The consideration, the mutual promise that is therefore executor or not yet performed. A unilateral contract, on the other hand, involves actual performance by one party in return or exchange for a promise. As there is actual performance, the consideration here is called executed consideration. See the case of Khalil versus Carbolic Smoke Ball Company. In that case, a company advertised in the newspapers that it will pay £100 to anyone that used a smoke ball for a minimum period of 2 weeks and still got influenza flu. The company added that it had deposited a sum of £1,000 with their bankers to show our sincerity in the matter, that is. The plaintiff, Khalil, bought the smoke balls and used as directed, but still fell ill with influenza. He sued the company claiming the £100 promised in the advertisement. As its defense, the company argued that the contract was made to the whole world and not to a particular person, and that a contract could not be made to the whole world. As a response to this argument, Bowen Law Justice held that a contract was not made to the whole world, but rather an offer could be made to the whole world that would only become a contract between the company and anyone that fulfills the conditions of the offer. That the promise was merely a mere advertisement gimmick, which was not intended to create any legal relations. The court rejected this on the grounds that the company had stated that it had lodged an amount with its bankers to meet any of its obligations. That the plaintiff had not notified the company of her acceptance. The court rejected this argument on the ground that the terms of the contract, there was no need to notify the defendant's company of the fact of acceptance. The company had waived that right and performance was sufficient to constitute acceptance. Note that unilateral contracts by their nature imply that the party accepting the offer can accept merely by performance without the need to inform the offeree. That the promise to pay was not supported by consideration from the plaintiffs was another argument. The court also rejected this argument on the ground that performance of the plaintiff constituted the required consideration. The plaintiffs were therefore entitled to recover the £100 as they had accepted the offer by fulfilling the conditions of the offer. Common types of unilateral contracts in Nigeria include reward cases and promotional offers from companies. It should also be noted that in a unilateral contract, as opposed to a bilateral contract, only the promisor or offerer is under a contractual obligation at any point in time. The features of a bilateral contract: it involves an exchange of promises and performance by both parties takes place in the future. A contract is an agreement that law will enforce. I am now entering the summary session of this study, and you have learned that 1. A contract is an agreement that the law will enforce. 2. Contracts are enforceable to preserve commerce and prevent chaos in everyday economic life. 3. Not all contracts are enforceable. For example, a simple contract made without consideration cannot be enforceable. 4. A formal contract derives its validity from its form, while on the other hand, a simple contract can only be enforced by a party who has furnished consideration. Thank you. God bless.